since the first thing will be the discussion, I think we can go from there. So, good morning. Welcome everyone to the June meeting of the Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force and Law Justice Council of Whatcom County. My name is Jack Hovenier. I'm a co-chair along with Stephen Gockley. Being a little more formal than usual, I know we have some people that typically haven't been here, so I just wanted to say who we are. Stephen's in the blue shirt. I guess I'm in a navy blue shirt. And our meetings start as we've agreed with a land acknowledgement statement, which I will read now. So before we begin, we acknowledge we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Simeamu people who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present, so please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truth at any and all public events. So with that, as many of you know, we've got a very full agenda today. We have a discussion about the Deacon Center for Hope, the Crisis Stabilization Facility, which will be the first on the agenda. We wanted to put that there because some of you we know are here for that. Following that, we're going to have a discussion and a opportunity for a recommendation or decision on the Justice Project implementation plan, followed by the annual report approval that goes to County Council this month. And assuming we get that far, we have the role of the steering committee. I don't think we're going to get to committee updates, but should that happen, I know people are prepared. So with that, as Stephen and I talked about this rather robust agenda, and not just Stephen, Stephen and I and Jill and Barry and I think a few others, we want to make space for this initial discussion about the Crisis Stabilization Facility, but recognizing we don't particularly anticipate a resolution, which I'll get to in a moment, in the discussion today. This is more, I think, of an entry point. I'm going to, within reason, try to keep this discussion to the 30 to 45 minute range because we need to have some space for some other discussion today. And prior to, and Dan, I'm going to give you a moment to think about this because I'm going to consult you in a moment. And I'm leaning a little bit on Councilman Dan Hamill, who brought this to our attention, but I may ask you in a few moments, Dan, how you want to proceed on the singular issue. But prior to that, I want to frame what I would consider the larger issue. And I apologize for those of you who may already know all these things, but let me give a little bit of background on the Crisis Stabilization Facility, and I think the substantive underlying issue at hand. The discussions of improving what we used to call a detox in Whatcom County probably started in the early 2000s under the Substance Abuse Advisory Board. There were drawings of having better privacy for the facility we had, means of improvement, so more mental health beds and so forth. That discussion carried over when that board was merged and to a new committee and also in the Behavioral Health Revenue Advisory Committee. When this Incarceration Prevention Reduction Task Force was formed, one of the, in fact, arguably the most substantive task in our initial mandate was to encourage the development of that facility with a belief that a robust facility with 16 beds on each side, because that's the largest that was allowed under the Medicare reimbursement policies, would sort of inherently have an opportunity to divert people from incarceration. So with that in mind, in virtually all the initial discussions, my own background is I was the original chair of that of the crisis stabilization and a long history with some of the other things. So Bill Alfo, Sheriff Alfo and I and others and many have sat for a long time in these discussions. And there was always a recognition that to be successful at diversion, there had to be a relatively quick drop off. It had to be clear to law enforcement of the field what they could or couldn't do. And that the facility itself would meet the needs of the clients that came there. In other words, there would be an appropriate place for them to be. So not putting other clients at risk and so on and so forth. Now, we didn't know exactly how all that would turn out, but I think it's fair to say that was the goal. I think the problem that we have today to some extent, and I will mention too, I hate blaming COVID for everything, but this rollout in COVID of trying to do this didn't help at all. Trying to open the facility, trying to establish the procedures didn't help. And it's a tricky situation. This will probably happen next month with well, I don't even want to get into the contracts with providers, but they're unusual too because of leases. So some people think there's these, it's an unusual situation that I think is creative and speaks to our community's desire to have a good facility. But the challenge I think before us is there seems to be amongst first responders, law enforcement, the community at large, a gap between what the facility can and can't do, who and who isn't appropriate, what the expectations are and what can reasonably done for quick drop-offs. And so I introduce all that in the hope of long-term, I think it's fair to say that the goal is to figure out what are the parameters, what are the metrics, what can we reasonably do, what are reasonable expectations, and once we've done that, how do we communicate that to the various parties, be it the first responders and law enforcement, the community at large, the individuals involved themselves, to what can reasonably expect it. Because I think if those, as I understand the issue, Dan, part of the issue is, I think that we're going to talk about in a minute, there was the Bellingham fire took someone and that person wasn't an appropriate person, and there was a concern about that. That's a one sentence version, but I think that's kind of what it is. And so establishing what those things look like and clearly disseminating them seems to be the long-term solution. So we'll have as much discussion reasonably as we need, but does anybody involved, I would say, object to the idea that long-term our focus, the solution, the thing we're trying to accomplish here is to establish the parameters, and then once we understand what can be done, communicate that with law enforcement, first responders, and others, so we're all on the same page. Is there any objection to trying to get there? Arlene, you're muted.
It seems to me that the long-term goal here is the Behavioral Health Urgent Care Center, which will not have very many obstacles to accepting almost anyone who comes. But that is long-term, as we all know, because it's not established yet. It's on our list of things, important things to do, and it will remove the barriers that are currently there, whatever they are. The problem is, where are our outreach people going to bring the people that need assistance now? And it seems to me that we have a very talented, creative, experienced group of people here in this room. I would be surprised if they were not able to come up with some short-term ideas to assist, rather than just to say to our outreach people, our emergency people, these people that you're bringing don't qualify.
So Arlene, we're going to have opportunity for discussion. I just wanted to know if you have an objection on this issue, framing it that way.
Objection to what?
To how I frame the issue of what we need to discern about the crisis stabilization, the current one. The fact that we need to understand what it can do, and we need to communicate to law enforcement, the various stakeholders, and the people that manage it, what they can and can't do. I mean, I'm assuming you're fine with that. The other solution.
Are you saying that? Are you saying that the current management of that organization cannot explain that now?
No, I'm not saying that. I think they probably can, but I think there is a lack of communication, which I think Dan will highlight. So what I asked, and maybe I wasn't clear, is what the purpose of this conversation is in this situation and this particular topic. But I agree with you, there is some promising stuff on the future that you just talked about. Absolutely. I'm going to turn this to Dan now, who brought the issue up. And Dan, maybe you can guide me a little in how you want to proceed to identify it and who you would like to speak on it.
Thanks, Jack. I think you queued it up pretty well in terms of defining what the questions are when it comes to the utilization of the Deacon Center for Hope crisis stabilization facility. What I'm trying to get at today is get to a yes when it comes to first responders being able to drop off patients at that facility, whether it be fire or police or MCOT or the homeless outreach team, alternate response team. I just want to get to a yes in terms of understanding what the parameters are for folks that are able to be treated at that facility. And so my hope today was to hear from first responders in particular, in terms of the things that they've encountered and the challenges, the successes, and how we can improve our ability as a community to help people get treatment there. And that's really it.
Cool. So maybe we could ask then some first responders to share some experience, and then I might ask Perry, you can assist with the contract of the people that are here today that run the facility. Maybe we can gather some anecdotal or some experiences, and then get some responses as to what's going on and understand it better. Is that, Perry, does that work for you? Great, cool. Sheriff Elfo, I see your hand up.
Yeah, and I agree with your analysis, Jack, with how you presented it. But from the very inception of the Incarceration Prevention Task Force, law enforcement has been very adamant that if this facility is going to be effective and alternative to the jail and incarcerating people and putting them in treatment, we had to have the ability for involuntary holds, both for substance abuse and for mental health. And the facility isn't geared up for that. We've emphasized it over and over and over again. And I think Deacon was one of the largest advocates of that. So we could probably come up with all kinds of instances where we found it not appropriate and had to use the jail instead, but just suffice to say for time that it is it's a continuing problem. We're hoping to see some resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Is there someone else, I'm hoping, with law enforcement or first responders that can share some of your experience? Chief Murchik, thank you.
So I just had to elicit some feedback from the folks on the boots on the ground. They echoed the same thing, that the overwhelming majority of the population we deal with are not accepted in the facility because it doesn't meet the ITA standard. So we aren't able to, under the RCW, involuntarily commit somebody, which is what the need is when someone's, dealing with us. It's usually risen to that level. So I think that's probably the biggest hurdle that I'm getting from our folks.
And then I would also add that I don't think there's a understanding 100% throughout the officers with regard to exactly when you can bring a person there and when you can't. And I did poll some of my officers, and we have taken some people down there, but it really hasn't been with great success. So I think going forward, being able to explain the different situations or the different scenarios, and really, I think that's what Dan Hamill is getting at, to just get that information out there. So that's kind of where we are right now.
So, Tank, when you say not with great success, meaning they bring someone and that individual is deemed by the facility to not be a fit, or they just don't take them at all?
Yeah, actually, they don't bring them first. What we do is we try to call. So then after that, most of the time, they don't meet the criteria.
Thank you. I was just going to ask Bellingham Fire Department. Go right ahead.
Yeah, Bill Hewitt with Bellingham Fire. Yeah, we've had, and I've got Joe Frank here with us, who probably has the most experience. I'll hand it over to him in a moment. But that's a lot of the folks that we're dealing with are not necessarily folks that are on a hold or on, yeah, being held against their will, but they, folks that are voluntarily willing to go somewhere, but we're still getting turned away there. And Joe, you want to add some examples?
Yeah, so frequently what we're looking for in a case like this is someplace other than the ER that can take somebody in crisis that are medically stable. And EMTs and paramedics do a good job of determining if they are medically stable and it's only a behavioral health crisis going on. And our first option is to contact Crisis Stabilization Center and then try to determine if we're going to go to detox or if we're going to go to crisis respite side. So right there is a hang up for first responders, determining which side is which and which number to push to get there. Once that happens, we talk to somebody and they have to speak with the person and answer 4 to 5 questions and then determine if they have a bed availability for that person or not. I have been told when I call and ask if there's a bed available, I have been asked who I had first before they told me if I have a bed available. And many other examples that Perry has documented for us through the health department. But frequently the answer is no. Up until I think Mr. Hamill went on a ride along with me recently, and up to that point, I had 1 successful admit in 5 years in this position through Crisis Stabilization Center. I find it frustrating. Rob Sullivan is the director of the Pioneer Human Service side, and he does a great job in fielding my phone calls and helping me understand why the no happened. And then he also does a great job of trying to get people in for us, but having to use that back number shouldn't be a thing. We should be able to call 1 phone number as a first responder, figure out what beds, how many beds are available, and get our person in there in an efficient manner.
Thank you. And Joe, I just want to say, having sat in a lot of those planning meetings, absolutely, and I'm not saying that's where we are or even hopefully we can get there, but the discussion always was 1 call, simple, with co-occurring. There'd be an obvious thing which side. It should be simple and fast. Certainly that was the goal. And to hear you've only had 1 admitted and successful in that much time is obviously concerning. So is there anyone else? Are we ready to turn? Oh, Raylene, and then I'm going to ask Harry if he wants to.
Will you add that real quick, Jack? 1 second.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I did want to add just one other scenario that came up here very recently, which was wasn't a question of space or whether or not they'd admit the person, but they didn't want to talk to us for an hour because they were in the middle of shift change, and so we had somebody who was willing, who was voluntarily willing to go to detox in that moment. And we got told, well, hang on to them until a little later in the morning and then bring them up because they were doing shift change. They didn't want to do the intake at that time. And as we all know, I mean, or anybody who's worked with addicts, when an addict says that they're ready to go, that's the time we got to move. If we give them an hour, that just gives them time to think about whether or not they really want to go. So
I'm smiling not because I'm amused, but I'm a person in long-term recovery. Absolutely correct. You go with strike when the iron's hot. And I really want everybody here to understand that the discussions as this facility was being talked about always envisioned, for the last 5 years at least, that law enforcement first responders would be a priority over another type of call. That part of the goal of this facility was quick and efficient admissions from first responders, law enforcement. That was an absolute goal of this facility in all the planning discussions. Raylene, and then Executive Sadhu, and then I want to go to Perry.
Thank you. I am obviously not a first responder, but I have spoken with some of the law enforcement agencies in the small cities and asked if they have been using the facility. And the response I've gotten has been no, that they have tried, kind of echoing Chief Mertzik and Chief Tanksley's, that the people that they need to have seen don't meet the qualifications. More likely than not, they actually end up at the hospital because they need that involuntary hold. And they can walk away from this facility even if it's stating that there's an involuntary side, which is definitely a concern. If you're taking somebody from a small city that doesn't have the staffing to have an officer with that person at the hospital or at this facility, and you think they're a danger to themselves or others, and you know they can walk away from this facility, they're more likely to walk away. And then the officers are notified that the person walked away, but they're back in their city, and now this person has left the facility in Bellingham, which is also a concern. So we want to make sure that this is user friendly, and that the officers feel like if they leave somebody there that can get treatment, they're leaving them in the right location. And I think we're hoping that it would be an alternative to the jail as well as the hospital. Thank you. I think Chief Turner.
Thank you, Arlene. I'm going to Executive Sadu, and then if there's another hand, and then
Yeah, I'll be very quick. I think that this discussion is a great way to kind of look back where we wanted to be, where we are, and how we can get there. But this the new funding, $9 million for the sobering facility, could be a link in this chain that where we don't have to decide, because it can be involuntary thing, and people can just bring them there, and then we have 24 hours to actually assess, decide what to do next step. It may not be perfect, and as a county, I think that come January 1, 2024, we are willing to put the remaining money needed to do that facility. That should be the first project out of the gate to build that facility, because we are so close, and it would help. It not the silver bullet, but it would be a great help to have that ability. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks you and Arlene for reminding us of that on the horizon. Sheriff Elko.
Yeah, I just in my email inbox today, just an example from the weekend on Friday. They had someone there on a court order. It was temporary released, and if they wouldn't stay in the center, they were to be returned and held without bail. And the person jumped over the fence and escaped the facility, and there was no notification to law enforcement.
Thank you.
That kind of causes us to lose a little bit of confidence and need to have better communications.
The one piece of information, Perry, I'm going to jump to you. I want everybody to here to have, so we're on the same page, and someone correct me. I don't think I'm going to get this wrong, but if I do, there was discussion about involuntary when this facility was envisioned. Initially, the decision was to have no involuntary component. And Deacon particularly advocated for at some point designing the facility so the mental health side could do a 12-hour hold. Perry would know the RCW that allowed it. The substance use disorder or detox side never had an involuntary component to it, but in the planning process, up to a 12-hour hold or whatever the RCW allowed was integrated and designed to be potentially part of that. Does that sound right to everybody who knows the background?
Yep, that's accurate, Jack.
Cool. I just want, because there's a lot of discussion about involuntary, and I want people to know, where we are, what was planned, and where we are. And with that, Perry, to you.
Sure. I really appreciate you framing it up the way that you have, Jack. And I guess a couple of pieces of where I'll start, and then help me if I'm, not on track in terms of information. The Crisis Stabilization Center is the providers are Compass Health and Pioneer Human Services. Pioneer Human Services provides withdrawal management services, and Compass Health provides triage or mental health stabilization. They are both actually certified by the state. There's a requirement of that, of course, in terms of providing services. They are both certified in the state as a residential treatment facility. That is the licensure. Also, Compass Health recently completed their certification for allowing 12-hour holds. As Jack mentioned, the RCW is 1031-110 that allows for a process of an individual that's committed a low-level crime for law enforcement to be able to transport the individual there, basically have a discussion. The individual is directed to remain at the facility, and that if the individual leaves in that given situation, the facility, the law enforcement office is informed at that point. We can get clarification. I don't know, Amy, if you know the specifics, but to my knowledge, no 12-hour law enforcement holds have been used at this point. It is relatively new, that we've gotten the licensure and et cetera, but I certainly understand law enforcement's perspective that it's like, well, if it's not a lockdown facility, then they're going to leave. But we also haven't utilized this component of the Crisis Stabilization Center at this point. Additional information that is going to be helpful. I want to stay on track, Jack.
Well, I think part of what I'm hearing, Perry, is this facility, and for those of you who don't know, Perry is with the health department and sort of, what would we call you, the initial point of contact, the liaison between the county and the contractors, the providers?
Yeah, a lot of activity going on between obviously first responders and citizens utilizing the facility, and so I act as a liaison between the county and the providers. We do, just as a note, have a Crisis Stabilization Center Advisory Committee once a month just to talk about challenges and issues. Certainly some of these topics have come up. We continue to work on them, and so that is my role.
So I think what, one thing I'm seeing is I think there is not a understanding necessarily of what can and can't be done. Like what, maybe either you could articulate that, or I see we have people from Pioneer and Compass Health, and there may even be a misunderstanding, or there may be a gap between what we hoped would be done and where we actually are. I don't know that. I think we're here to find out.
Absolutely. So I'll offer up, we have certainly in the Crisis Stabilization Center Advisory Committee that includes law enforcement and other first responders, certainly the providers and the county, obviously, and just an outline of admission criteria. And I think sometimes it's helpful to also say exclusionary criteria. And please, Amy, Rob, whomever, jump in here as well. As far as admission criteria for the facility, it is voluntary, as we talked about. That is related to the licensure. 18 years of age or older, the individual can ask to leave. The staff work with an individual that is maybe wanting to leave because of discomfort or something else, and they use motivational interviewing and crisis de-escalation kinds of approaches. They are both able to actually provide some medication as appropriate. We can get into more of the details of that. And they store the individual's belongings in a secured area, and et cetera. Conditions that do require an initial medical clearance from the hospital or a PCP is an individual that's requiring emergent primary medical care. So something that a lot of times is misunderstood is that individuals, not necessarily first responders, but individuals will view the facility as an ER type or a medical facility, and that's not accurate. Neither of the facilities, although they do have 24-hour nursing and prescriber ability, they are not set up to address primary medical conditions. So some of those specifics would be individuals that are in need of IV fluids or IV medication. They can't do that within their current licensure. Individuals with active seizure disorder that is occurring for them without medication. They don't have the ability to treat that level of incident. Individuals that are prescribed medication, for example, requiring blood level monitoring to ensure medical safety, that is lithium or Depakote. The level of care that is provided at the facilities does not have the ability to provide services to those individuals. And so those individuals would be referred to or recommended to have a medical evaluation at that point in time. Conditions that require a higher level of care just in general, it may or may not be, the hospital. Individuals that require oxygen replacement therapy, that is individuals that are on oxygen, the licensure and certification does not allow an individual to be admitted in that given situation. If the individual is unable to complete their 5 activities of daily living, they refer to them as ADLs, that is bathing, personal hygiene, dressing, being able to dress and undress by themselves, transferring movement, mobility, by themselves, and toileting, consonants related tasks, and eating unassisted. If the individual is unable to do that, the level of care that is provided at the facility is unable to provide that level of service. The other one that I think maybe gets down to some of the pieces here is that oftentimes it's not understood that the crisis stabilization center staff cannot go hands-on. It's the simplest way for me to say it. They cannot put hands on the client in any given situation that might present itself. That is then that an individual's behavior must be suitable for group living, no physical aggression, combativeness, etc. And the ability to engage in treatment and care planning. And so that is limiting, for certain in terms of the level of care that's provided. And it's challenging, of course, to be able to know in an intake setting if, the individual in some of these given situations meets those criteria. And it's also part of the reason that there is a somewhat involved intake process on both sides to determine whether the individual, for example, is at risk for their primary health condition and need to be referred to a higher level of care, medical care, of course, the hospital or a primary care physician. So I'll stop there for a second because that may have generated questions, etc. Again, what I did want to clarify that is based in the certification and licensure that the providers have. So I'll stop there for a moment. And
I think, we've got Amy with Compass House and Rob and Clinton with Pioneer Human Services. And I want to make, I don't want you to feel on the spot, but I do want to make an opportunity for you to say something. And I'm sure you're hearing that there is a real desire to understand what you can and can't do. And would any of you like to kind of weigh in a little bit?
Sure, this is Rob Sullivan. I'll go. I think we all share those frustrations. I think there's certainly a lack of services around certain individuals. I think one of the challenges for us is certainly bed utilization. I think we ran through last year right around 78% of capacity. So we're running around 12 and a half, 11, 12 and a half a day of people with a maximum stay of 5 days. I think at times people's medical needs do disallow them from being in services, and I think that's a challenge. And I think trying to look at how we work with first responders, and I think one of the things is kind of defining what is our first responders. Is if everybody's a first responder, then no one's a first responder. And looking at how we manage the ability to take people in is limited by the number of staff we have. So we can't have 3 or 4 people show up at once and manage that because we don't have the staffing for it. So I think trying to look at, how do we define that? I'm all for defining it. I'm all for trying to be collaborative around it. But I think those are some of the challenges we're bumping into at the moment.
Thank you, Rob. Chief Mertzik?
Perry, what was that last behavior bullet point you said? You can't, they're limited, they'd be refused if their behavior was what?
The way that we wrote it up was that behavior must be suitable for group living, because it is a group setting. There's a milieu, obviously there's individual rooms, but then there's a central, meeting area and etc. So no physical aggression or combativeness, and able to engage in treatment and care planning.
I think that physical aggression combativeness is it's a subjective term, and that's where the frustration from our guys are. So I've gotten feedback of when someone's using minimal curse words and acting in a manner that's caused concern. That's the population we deal with all the time. And so I think that's probably where kind of the rub is like, these folks they meet all the medical requirements, but they're in crisis. That's why they're there. So, I don't know if there's any room to give there, but that's the crux of the feedback that I got was if someone's kind of acting up, but they're not necessarily being violent. We're used to it as in this job, we're used to getting cursed at frequently. So, and I don't know what the staff levels are, your staff level experience is. So it's hard to, again, there's the subjectivity of all that.
Right. And I think that that's a great point, Chief Mertzig, that that is interpretive, at that point, and subjective, to some extent, and really, I think taking a look at that. One of the things to understand is that given that the Crisis Stabilization Center staff can't go hands-on with an individual, if an individual does become violent, their only alternative is to call 911 at that point, which BPD and has responded to calls, and that sort of thing, in that given situation. So I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing, but of course we're also attempting to make sure that law enforcement doesn't have to return, and so that you're right. I believe, anyway, in my opinion, that that's a really accurate call in terms of that conclusion at that point in time, and it has to be fairly quick because law enforcement needs to get back out on patrol. So I appreciate that.
Amy, would you like to comment on that from the behavioral compass side?
Yeah, so I think I've had people swear and yell at me. I used to be a DCR like that for behavioral health. Like that's also like, yeah, that sounds about right. I think there's a few things. So like, kind of want to reiterate also what Perry said is we are voluntary. So we would want to make sure even they're yelling and screaming that they're willing to be there. And or we are ready for those 12-hour involuntary holds. Once again, we still can't lay hands on people. So there's going to be a weird, if they want to leave, like what we try to do to keep them to stay. And the big piece would just be letting law enforcement know, like, hey, this is happening. The hope during that 12 hours is to figure out a better place for them if they don't want to stay there. So is it getting detained? Is this really not behavioral health? Sometimes we actually work with like Pioneer. Is this more of a substance use thing? Because we can't do detox. So if they start showing signs of detox, we have to kind of pass them, over. So I do want to just kind of make that comment. And then I heard a few people say the terms like ITA. So this isn't an ENT. We don't do detentions. This is not under 7105. Our holds are under a different RCW. They're the 1031 that Perry had mentioned. And so I do, and this is like my DCR side too, right? Like I want to be specific, like this is not an ITA hold that we're doing. We can get DCRs on side to do those if that is appropriate for the person that's there. But I mean, we're trying hard to turn all these no's into yeses and to turn things around. I've been working with staff and, when we have denials, we review them. We've tried to make the intake process as easy as possible as far as having a limited number of questions to go through. I think the other two, Perry, that you didn't mention due to licensing constraints is sex offenders are kind of case by case. We have to kind of know what's going on. We can accept them, but more likely than not, it needs to be something that's like a little older, not if it's like a newer case, just because of licensing. And if they're convicted of arson, that's another one for licensing reasons. We have a challenging time, but it's also if to the part, like the referring party's knowledge. So we don't have knowledge of it, then that's also fine too. So, but I appreciate that feedback. And I know we do want, we want to fill the beds and we want to help the community. And I hope we do see our intent is to, partner with as many people as we can to make it useful for everybody.
Super quick acronym definitions. ITA, if folks don't know, involuntary treatment admission. And ENT is an evaluation and treatment facility licensed by the state to take involuntary cases. So just wanted to offer that clarification. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you, Perry. And further, maybe if we'd had the money and the resources, we talked extensively about ENT, but the reality was that wasn't, well, that might have been ideal. That wasn't something we had the resources to accomplish. So Arlene and then Stephen, and then I'm going to try to talk about next steps forward and move on to the agenda.
Yes, speaking from the time that I worked at Crisis Stabilization, which I have to admit is some years ago, and changes may have occurred since then. But what I remember is that the people who came to us for help were the most complex cases that you can imagine. Many had very severe mental illnesses. Many were co-occurring, which also complicated their cases. So when you have the most complex cases, you need the most trained, experienced, and educated staff. That was not the case. Why was that not the case? Many times the employees were straight out of college. Almost no experience with these kinds of conditions. Why were those on staff? Salaries, right? Very low salaries. It could be different now. I don't know. I haven't asked about that lately, but I can tell you that's why they didn't get some of the most experienced staff. The reason that I was willing to work there was because I was already retired and I could afford to not earn a high salary and do the work, and I took to it. But this is one of the reasons that there are so many exclusions. Yet the skill of the staff.
I'll take that for a second. I do want to speak to it a little bit because I think that there's some valid points, but I also want to also speak to certainly on the Pioneer side. You know, I have a high degree of confidence in the abilities of the staff there. And what I would say overarching and hearing here is not something that can't be worked, I think, collaboratively towards better meeting the needs of law enforcement. But certainly there's the reality of funding. And, you know, I'm a big advocate for, you know, the needs. And I would encourage this group to continue to advocate for increasing funding so that we can be competitive when it comes to paying staff and ensuring that we have the appropriate staff, whether that's required credentials. You know, it's hard to find nurses, it's hard to find mental health professionals. And so money is certainly a part of that. So I don't want to dismiss it outright, but I will say, you know, the staff that we do have there, I don't hear anything here that they would not be capable of doing. It's just a matter of honestly laying out what the needs are, us being intentional about taking steps to, you know, fill in those gaps.
Thank you so much. Stephen?
Thank you, Jack, and thanks to everybody who's contributed so far. I'm an original member of the task force. I'm a layperson in these areas, but I have been hearing the needs and the conversations about attempts to meet them through the Ann Deacon Center for years. So I guess I appreciate Jack's and Dan's purpose at the outset that today's discussion was to frame the issues so that we have a little more clarity about what needs to be done in subsequent conversations that can start to address the issues that are being floated here. And I'm trying to make sure I'm clear on this. What I'm hearing is that there's been a rather surprising lack of communication. There are a number of parties intersecting around the Ann Deacon Center. There's the health department. There are Compass and Pioneer contracted providers. There are EMS. And everybody brings a different perspective and a different need to this. And it sounds like what's happening is people have different understandings of what they could have expected from this. I'll just say that from my years of listening in on these conversations, we were looking at a crisis triage center that wasn't being utilized because it wasn't accessible to the people who wanted to bring people in and to have people served in crisis in a triage way. And from my seat as a co-chair, I thought we had taken significant steps to solving that. And the keys to that were more people would be admitted in the facility than not. The admission protocol would be a fairly quick drop off so that law enforcement and EMS personnel could get back out in the field and serve other needs. And that a significant percentage of people could be diverted from jail and largely non-existent services at Peace Health and be taken care of in the short term at the Crisis Stabilization Center. I hear that none of that is happening. People are diverted away by phone. There's a long admission protocol that makes it unfeasible for EMS and law enforcement not to want to drop off people. And only a small percentage of people, I mean, one admission over some substantial period of time is really inaccessible, not accessible. So those are the problems I'm hearing. It means people aren't, I'm surprised that this hasn't been worked out with the health department and the contract terms and the crisis stabilization facility subcommittee to this point. But I guess I'm feeling some urgency and hoping that this conversation and this framing will sort of turbocharge the kinds of cross-party conversations and problem solving that I think needs to happen pretty soon. And I look forward to hearing Perry's reactions to these as well as his own comments.
Thank you, Stephen. So we have Perry, Councilman Buchanan, and then I'm going to try to wrap up with next steps and move our agenda.
Yeah, I think a really helpful discussion, and I very much appreciate the input and the comments and thought processes. A couple of things. I agree that the communication with law enforcement and first responders be more clear and more succinct. I think that efforts have been made in the Crisis Stabilization Center Advisory Committee to provide that information. I find that information doesn't necessarily get disseminated to those offices in a succinct way. And again, that may be the way that the information is presented in the Crisis Stabilization Center Advisory Committee meetings. So a more succinct way of being able to do that. I do think, although I didn't keep or I didn't have any data for, if you will, our old triage facility before the Crisis Stabilization Center was opened. But one of the things that I can share also is that I'll just speak to the last quarter of 2023. There's been a 78% utilization by withdrawal management services for available beds. And there has been a 70% utilization of available beds in the mental health stabilization side. Improvements from the previous year. I'll just leave it there with that. We can get into more data if that is, requested. The other thing that, again, from my perspective, that I do definitely run into, Raylene was helpful and forwarded some information relative to a lieutenant that was is part of the Ferndale Police Department that had expressed, concerns about efficacy of use and first responder drop off and, and attempts. And I communicated with this lieutenant just in regards to the Crisis Stabilization Center. And I don't know this 100%, but it felt like the experiences that the lieutenant was describing for his staff and so forth were from the previous facility. Challenges and inability to get individuals in. I provided some more updated information and offered, my availability and services to him. And, he embraced that. And he said, well, that was a while back, and maybe we need to take another look at that. And so that really kind of speaks to my point, the communication that has been a part of this meeting. I think the other thing that so I'm really looking forward to some direction and help just around what those next steps are. I certainly have a list of systems improvement actions that have been taken, and the systems improvement actions that need to occur or be discussed. And so I'm interested in that. So I'll stop at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Perry. And I'm grateful you're able to be here today. I know it was a question for a little while. Glad you're here. Councilman Buchanan.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Perry, I was just looking, searching for the advisory committee, and I couldn't find anything just in the brief time I had. But my question is, are first responders represented on that advisory committee?
Yes.
They are law enforcement, BPD, the sheriff's office, and Fire Joe Frank and some others, also attend.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, here's where I think we are. And before we move on, I want to thank Amy with Compass Health, and it's obvious you understand your clients. And thank you, Rob and Clinton. And Clinton, I do have some anecdotal experience, and I agree. The staff, I'm more familiar with the substance use disorder side. They do a good job. And Robert, your issue of who first responders are, the working definition within the committee for us, I think, would be people that I think of as employed fire and EMS and police. We're primarily. Sorry about that. We're primarily who we were thinking of. I think we need some hard data, meaning ideally, Perry, I think if the county could work with Compass Health and Empire Human Services to give us something that like Sheriff Elfo or Chief Tanksley or Joe could give to people in the field, like here are the basic criteria. Here's what you can expect. Even if it's not what might be ideal, because we might have something better down the road, it's better to know what we can do than to have misinformation. And I think it has to be simple as possible. And as Chief Mertzig said, you're going to have aggressive behavior. I mean, if we're going to rule out, verbal abuse, you aren't going to take anybody practically. So that's a little bit of a misstatement, but yeah, I would hope that when we address this issue next month, that what we can get, if there's time, and if not, then let us know if we need to make it in the August meeting instead. As I would really appreciate if the providers and you, if this is okay, we're an advisory group, we can't mandate this, but I think we need something we can point to so this information is clear, so it's not ambiguous. That and it can be updated. This doesn't have to be a permanent thing, but we need something simple that can be updated to let people know what they can and can't expect. And I would particularly hope we have good communication, meaning if however that works in this day and age with technology, there should be a way for the people who are trying to avoid incarceration to contact the facility and clearly know if there's a bed, yes or no. And then the only question is this person appropriate? But it seems like that shouldn't be too big a barrier. So those would be my initial thoughts. Dan, does this address your concerns enough for this point for going forward, Councilman Hamill? And while he's maybe coming back, I'll ask Perry, does that seem reasonable? Is that something you're comfortable with?
Dan, you want to go first? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to get my camera back on. Yeah, I think that I think these questions were, relatively well answered this morning. I think there's more to be discussed. I think we had some census numbers that were put out. I think I'd like to look at the long term. Perry, you had mentioned that there was improvement over this year over last year. I'd like to see what that is. I'd like to understand the turnaways and why people were turned away. And I'd also like to understand, we heard a lot from first responders and law enforcement and fire today. I'd also like to understand what other services are using this facility and up to and including individuals that are using it.
Thank you, Dan. But you are okay with the approach for the follow-up for our next meeting, I think.
Yep.
Cool. All right. And Perry, does that sound okay to you?
It does. And I think that they're all good ideas. I can certainly provide that to Dan, to you. in terms of the 2022, 2023 data, and obviously can provide that to the task force as well. And I think also we had discussed, and this is on me, putting together a visor card, what we referred to as a visor card, a very quick, compact reference point for law enforcement first responders relative to, as you said, that call, the clearance, and what excludes an individual. I go back to the point that Chief Mertzig made that I really appreciate, that it's like that part of the subjective conclusion. And also, I think talking about some a little more detailed template for individuals that are declined admission. I think that's something to look at as well. So I am up for that. I've made my notes to it. So I appreciate that, Jack. Thank you.
Cool. And this isn't a one and done. I think this is an ongoing process. And I really, really like, Clint, what you said is, I don't see any problem here we can't ultimately solve, but we've got to get some better dialogue to get there. We have the facilities, we've got some budget, we've got good providers, we certainly have a need. So I think this is sort of the entry point in trying to get that. But my goal is to have the sheriff, Chief Mertzig, Bellingham Fire, others, EMS, Fire District 14 come in and say, hey, it's better. We've got some admits, it's working better. And that's what we're trying to get to as it relates to this task force and our purview. Raylene, and then we're going to move on, because but you can take us home.
Thank you. And this is actually kind of a side from the Ann Deacon Center for Hope, because this is the Ann Deacon Center for Hope is for adults. They're 18. As we move into the Legal and Justice Joint Committee next month, we're going to be talking about juveniles. So as we're talking about this, do we have a center for juveniles? Do we have a crisis triage center for kids? Ann Deacon Center Hope, I don't think is that option. So I don't know if there's ways to look at that in the future, or if we need a separate facility. And these are discussions that are kind of come up at the joint meeting in June 13th, but just food for thought as we move forward on these topics. Thank you.
Sure. It isn't, but Perry is going to tell you that, I think.
Yeah,
I certainly could have waited to share. It's a interesting question, Raylene, and obviously I think that people are pretty aware of our young people, just resources for our young people, really challenging in a number of ways. Interestingly enough, a program in Blaine, Touchstone Counseling, just received funding from Department of Commerce for a small crisis stabilization program within their facility. I'm actually meeting with Dr. Crate here in the next week relative to that, and have been supporting that. It's not enough, but it is, I think, a response to the kinds of concerns that you and others have been raising relative to youth and services within the community, particularly crisis stabilization services.
Thanks, Perry. And that's also very consistent with the task force goal of prevention and even intervening when we can. And we all want places to take people. And I'm hoping that when we get this, like Arlene and Executive Sadu both mentioned this other facility, I think if we can get some clarity with this, that'll also help identify the gaps in our current system where we don't have the resources and need them. So thank you for the people that brought that up. And I think with that, again, I want to really thank particularly the Compass Health and Pioneer Human Services people that came. We appreciate your time. We hope this was more helpful than, I said in our steering committee, I don't want this to be a witch hunt. I want to have a dialogue so we can try it. We're all just trying to get to the same place. We just may have different approaches to get there. So thank you for your time. And we appreciate the work you're doing very much and to help us with our goals. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen.
Thank you, Jack. And I'll just extend my own thanks to our guests who've contributed a lot of useful information today. And just want to say that a couple of points were made about need for additional funding, salary enhancements, certification, admissions criteria. All of those are things that I would encourage you through Perry or others to bring to the task force. We'll gladly consider lending our weight to any efforts, legislative, council-based or otherwise, that might be necessary to create pathways for you to better carry out the services we're hoping you can do. So please keep us in mind as an active and enthusiastic ally in making this work for all parties. I'll also say that you're certainly welcome to stay for the remainder of the meeting, but you're certainly not expected to. I know you have other pressing work to do, and please feel free to exit at your own convenience. The next agenda item we're taking up is to look at the implementation plan that's on the verge of going to the county council. The council has scheduled a workshop session to look at the implementation plan, mostly in light of crafting an ordinance that is in draft form at this point. The plan itself, and I believe the ordinance, will be subject to first reading at the council meetings on next Tuesday, June 20th. The workshop will be tomorrow, June 13th, and that's accessible on the council website to anybody who's interested. The implementation plan, just as background, comes after over a year of hard work by the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, and which included the participation of many of you all as members of the task force, and the support of additional task force members who weren't Stakeholder Advisory Committee members in a formal sense. That resulted in the needs assessment report to the council that was accepted by the council in January of this year, and the adoption or the assignment of responsibility to create an implementation plan that was passed on to the county executive. And an implementation planning team was formed to carry that out. Tyler Schroeder was the executive's lead on that. Executive Sadhu took part in that. Jack and I, as co-chairs, were also part of that. And council chair, Barry Buchanan, as well as our able consultants, Holly O'Neill and Marty Solomon from Crossroads Consulting. You've seen multiple iterations of that implementation plan and the core project list that came out of it. All of that was intended to carry forward the recommendations of the SACS Needs Assessment Report and to tee up the subsequent funding planning and project staging, I guess I would say, decisions that will be in the council's hands, not in the implementation planning teams or in the task force in its guise as the Law and Justice Council. You received what we called the final draft with your original packet, I believe, on that would have been June 2nd, Friday, June 2nd. And then last Friday, Jill sent out a redlined final draft for your perusal over the weekend. We've also had openings for online comments that closed as of last night. We've had a town hall session on May 24th. We've had focus groups. We've had online surveys, social media surveys, and a variety of avenues for community input. You've been given the link for online comments. Some of them have come in over the weekend, and I encourage you to update yourself if you didn't look at those last night. Our task today is to take up action on that final redlined draft, so that the council can be informed as it meets to take up its work tomorrow. And Barry, I asked if you would be willing to run through the summary slides that we have for just to highlight the revisions that people may or may not have had a chance to study. Are you available to do that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, Jill, I believe you should have the slides. Great. Okay, Barry, I'm going to turn it over to you for the course of these slides, and then I'll lead our further steps.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. So this first slide just kind of illustrates the all the feedback that we received on the May 31st draft of the plan. We've had just public comments come in from the general public to the Justice Project webpage. We've had the letter from the Small Cities Caucus and the mayors, letter from the Bellingham City Council, and then comments from the June 6th County Council meeting of the whole that came from the council. Next slide. The feedback has been summarized by our great consultants. That's some affirmations of the plan, and there were some concerns. Encouragement for a larger jail was one of the comments we got. Preference for the LaBounty site. Recommendation to remodel the current jail. Emphasize priority of reentry and behavioral health services, and requests to be more clear. Language describing the facilities, details about certain projects, and how the sales tax is used and how those costs are shared. Next slide. So some of the changes that have been implemented up through June 9th are a safe and humane jail coordinating with a behavioral care center was the previous one of the previous versions. The other one was a public safety and health center to provide secure detention coordinated with a behavioral care center. So the council felt that we needed a little more plain language, and we've heard that from other people in the community. So the current version is now a jail and behavioral health treatment center. So it better describes the purpose and use of those pieces of the plan. We added more information about determining the size of the jail. We clarified decisions that are coming before the council, determine the jail and behavioral health treatment center size and location. And then we highlighted how local location impacts the facilities design and size options. That be kind of the cost differences between vertical and horizontal and so on. Next slide, please. So this shows kind of over time how the tax is utilized and grows throughout the life of the bond. You see the green is the actual money coming in the door. The black is very hard to read. That's the COB's implementation plan funding. The blue above that is the counties, and then the top line is the small cities. You see that there's an upfront push up through 2028/2029, where a majority of the funding is being utilized to secure the bond and start the construction phase. And then that, due to the contribution that would be coming from the small cities, would pay some of that debt down, and that would go down substantially and ongoing from 2029 on. There would be much more available for the services. Next slide. This is communicating the plan. This is our famous infographic that, believe it or not, is simplified. It was a little more busy and complex before, but this is great. This started out on a kind of a back of a napkin. This was Tyler's version. I had one too that I'm still looking for. I can't find the little binder it was in, but it's great. It describes kind of the needs, kind of how those needs are met, and it does it in a pictorial way. Next slide. Next steps tomorrow, as Stephen articulated, the county council as a whole will have a workshop about 3 hours tomorrow from I think it's 1:30 to 4:30. We'll be looking at both this plan and the draft ordinance, starting to hone that down to get ready for introduction on the 20th, as Stephen mentioned. That'll be when the final inputs from the county council during the day, and then those final comments will get folded into that ordinance for introduction that evening. June 30th, the plan would be submitted to the county council as far as the packet goes for the July 11th meeting, which is when the hearing would be and the final vote. that it, Joe? So that's kind of what we've done in the past couple of weeks, actually. So Stephen, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Barry. And thanks, Holly and Marty, for putting that summary together. So as I said, the council or the task force, I'm sorry, and the Law and Justice Council has had multiple opportunities to advise and comment as the implementation plan was developed. This is our last look at that plan before it's sent to the hands of the council and any last minute tweaking that their further deliberations want to make to it. So you've had a chance to look at that. You've had a chance to look at the comments. And this is, I guess, two comments. This is not, at least as far as Jack and I have seen, a sort of a from scratch, open-ended conversation about this. A lot of work has gone in on this. Comments from one end of the spectrum to the other as recommendations have been taken. The SAC needs assessment report was the best effort with limited time and limited expertise and limited professional resources to come up with a needs assessment and gap analysis report. The implementation team with limited time and limited expertise to this point has taken it the next step. And basically, I think it's fair to say what the implementation planning team is seeing is that we have established a platform that doesn't answer every detail, but does advance the level of detail from the needs assessment report, fleshes them out, scales them out over a period of time, adds detail in terms of narrowing questions for the council. The ultimate work from here on is going to be in the council's hands and the executive's hands. So a lot of people have wanted every question answered. I think we've come to the conclusion that we're not able at this point in time to answer every one of those questions. We've done the best we can, we, the implementation planning team. And so I think we're asking for the task force and the Law and Justice Council format to weigh in on whether we are going to recommend the plan that you've seen, the final red line version for council consideration in the beginning of its deliberations at its workshop tomorrow and in the subsequent weeks up to a final presentation for council consideration on July 11th. Barry or Tyler, do you want to add anything there in terms of process or from your perspective as members of the planning team? Okay, then I see Sheriff Elfo.
Yeah, I had a just comment on page 29 where it talks about how it was formulated a need for 430 beds. And that was looking at the current average daily population of the jail and then adding the 20% factor, which we need to keep people separated that may have grievances against each other that could escalate and be dangerous. People of different genders, people with different gang affiliations, and so on and so on. But it doesn't take into account the people that are out with outstanding warrants because of the booking restrictions. And I think that needs to be, they can't be overstated enough. I don't envision that if it's built to that size, we're going to be off of booking restrictions. We're going to remain on them. And I just wanted to call that out so expectations can be adjusted accordingly. And I know we need a new facility. This one has health issues. It has, what I've talked about since this task force started long before to its predecessors, It needs a lot of fundamental things that are inherent in a jail to provide a better level of service, but this is not going to take us off booking restrictions. That will continue, I can almost say with certainty, into the future. So I just wanted to be on record saying that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate that information, and I did see that also reflected in your online comment as well. I'm going to ask Tyler in a second to just add his framing comment to what that figure means, but understandably, there is no way that we could take account with the information we have at this point with how many people would be encompassed by the point you just made, Sheriff. So
right, and I see this Vera contract for some data they're collecting, and I signed off on it from our side of the house here at the jail. But again, like I've emphasized, they need to look at what the municipal courts, their data, and it needs to look at the tribal courts and their data, because we're not getting a picture if we just look at Superior and District Court. We're not gaining an understanding of all the needs. But I understand funding is limited, but I just wanted to make sure there was a clear understanding on those issues.
right. So my point was, at this moment when we're acting on an implementation plan, there is no data that could address your point. So we had to do the best we could, understanding that number is a placeholder, and that we'll try to make a more accurate estimate as design phase moves forward. But Tyler, do you want to articulate where that number came from?
Yeah, Tyler Schroeder, Deputy Executive. I was just going to actually recognize Stephen to Sheriff Elfo's point, and to the point, the letter that we got from the small cities and the mayors of Whatcom County. This version of the implementation plan recognizes that consideration, recognizes that before final decisions are made about size, we need to incorporate both a consideration of correctly sized based on a fair analysis of population growth, and strategic investments to avoid unnecessary incarceration, what this plan is trying to accomplish, and then also a further discussion with the cities about booking restrictions. And we anticipate to do that as it moves forward. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, Tyler. Jason, I see your hand up.
Good morning, everyone. Stephen, I think I'm a little confused on what we're doing right now. Are we just discussing this plan, or that was put forth by Satpal and Tyler, or yeah, I'm just really confused. It's Monday, just had my coffee, confused on what we're doing right now. And then also, if we are discussing this plan, I would love to ask directly Tyler and Satpal, how did y'all come up with a plan such as this? Because according to the recommendations that were put forth and what the priorities are with folks with lived experience and the BIPOC folks in this community, your plan is the complete opposite of that. So I would love to know, were those voices really taken into account, or were they just tokenized? And that's really important in this conversation. So Stephen, maybe the first question is, what exactly are we doing right now? Second question is, if we can dig a little bit deeper into the data, that would be helpful as well.
So I'll take a whack at question number one. Jason, thank you. I may be over caffeinated, and that's why there's a lack of clarity. We're moving as expeditiously as we can without burrowing into details and trying to rewrite or debate particular points within the final draft. Move as expeditiously as possible to forwarding this on with some position from the Law and Justice Council to the County Council for their beginning of work tomorrow. And I'll let Tyler or Executive Sadhu comment on your question number two.
Maybe Scott, if I can speak.
Okay.
Jason, this process started in 2019. Then this process started in earnest in end of 2020. And that I believe that I've been regular at all the meetings, but I didn't speak very much because I wanted it to be a plan by the people, not by the administration or county executive. I spoke probably twice in a whole year to this body, to the SAC also, and this body. I believe the public has considered everything. This is not up to Satpal Sidhu or Tyler Schroeder to sort through all the data we have received. So that's the only answer I have. Thank you.
Scott?
So yeah, I just wanted to comment on a couple of things. First, the mayor sent a letter, and Barry Buchanan mentioned it was the small cities, but also Mayor Fleetwood signed it as well. So it just, everybody's clear that it came from the 7 mayors, not just the small city mayors. One thing that we requested in the letter is no booking restrictions, and we probably understand no booking restrictions is maybe an impossible request, but we want to work with the county to make sure there's minimal booking restrictions in the future. And one way to do that is we would like a clause in it somewhere that, like Skagit County has, if the facility is full, and we have a definition of what full is, 85% capacity at 6 out of 12 months, or some definition of full, that automatically triggers additional pods to be added to the current or the proposed new facility. And that, in our opinion, would minimize booking restrictions into the future. Also on size, which directly reflects into booking restrictions, we don't know what the size is. I guess we would prefer not to have that size defined until we have enough data to actually put a number on it. And if that takes after the initiative to figure it out, that's fine. I mean, we just don't want the public necessarily to have a number in mind when we start. We need to, we want to know, we want to build it right sized, not oversized, not undersized, but right sized. And I just want to make those things clear. And I guess the other question I have for the chairs is, do you want a motion to get this on the table so it becomes, do you want to do that at this point?
First of all, I want to thank you and the other mayors for that letter. That was thoughtful. And I think that reiterates a lot of what the planning team was trying to do. We had opinions on the number that ranged from nobody should ever be in jail to lock them all up, do behavioral health later. We need at least 1,000 beds. So we don't know. And in fact, to Jason's point, BIPOC voices and lived experience voices were all over that spectrum themselves. There's no unanimity any place in the community on this. It's going to be compromise in the sort of the messiest sense of that word. Yes, at some point we will look for a motion, and it wouldn't hurt to have it now or after the people who have their hands up have a chance to weigh in also.
Well, to get it on the table, I'll make a motion that we.
I've got one when we get there. That's okay.
Okay, that's fine. All right,
Cool.
So that I'll wait on that. And then I guess I wanted to the behavioral health piece of this. The graph that was flipped up a few minutes ago that showed the funding sources. And I just want to emphasize Bellingham's commitment to behavioral health right out of the gate, which is significant, and significant to the tune of $1.5, probably to $2 million per year in the first couple of years, and then more after we get the down payment figured out for the facility. So, and the county, from what I gather, is very committed to behavioral health services as well, with their 60% at the 2/10 tax that will be coming in. So if we can get a facility built after about 4 or 5 years, significant public behavioral health funding is available. And I've been working with Tyler and now Brian, who's not with us anymore. He left the city, but them closely on all the finance plans. And so I'm comfortable that the plan laid out right now funds both the facility, the jail that we need, as well as significant behavioral health services and other services in the future.
And I'll just note to supplement Scott's comment that that chart shows the importance of capital costs up front, getting that started. But it's not entirely capital costs. There is services and program cost that will be started, and the plan itself, as you've seen, lays out, I don't know, 15 or so test steps that can be begun in year one, most of which are service oriented. They just aren't in the $1 million range like the capital costs are. So you see the chart heavily weighted toward capital costs in year 1 through 3, but there will be significant development action to build the service structure around those capital costs. So thanks for pointing that out, Scott.
Yeah, and I just encourage everyone, if you get the chance to look at that graph, just note over time how the behavioral health piece of it becomes significant compared to the small piece at the bottom that is our bond payment cost.
Thanks again.
Yeah.
Heather, your hand is up.
Good morning, Heather Flaherty here as a citizen representative. And I think that this is a really great working draft of an implementation plan and a strong framework of projects. I don't think I can support voting for it as a final plan, though. I submitted maybe 30 or so questions late last week that I know, Stephen, you said this is not the time and place to have those kinds of things answered. And also I have both the survey from the people who have been in the jail and the survey of people that was later with the victims of crime and formerly incarcerated and BIPOC individuals. And the priorities are very different. That I think this is a really system and institutional expertise informed plan, but doesn't fully reflect some of those community perspectives that we have really strived to get. And so I just want to be clear, I've never been an opposition vote at this table, and I want to share some reasoning for why I would vote no for the final, but I do think it's a really good working draft right now.
Thank you, Heather. Jack, your hand is up.
Yeah, two things. First, just a simple note. I wanted Sheriff Alpo and anyone else to know that the current most revised version of the plan on that section about booking restrictions does now state the number of beds needed should include an estimate of the impact of removing booking restrictions. So just want people to know that highlight is that is aware. As far as a motion, I am going to make a motion because of the timing of this, but it is with the understanding, kind of like we did with the SAC report, that in spirit, we see this as moving the right way, but this is not a final product. That's just reality. It just isn't. And thank you for your comments, Heather. I haven't read all of them. I've read about half, but I got it, but you put a lot of time in it. Thank you. But the motion I would like to make is on behalf of the task force is I move that the Incarceration Prevention Reduction Task Force and Law and Justice Council endorse the Justice Project Implementation Plan as ultimately approved by the county executive and county council. So that would be the motion that I would like to present.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. And Jack, do you want to just, for clarity's sake or for maximum clarity's sake, do you want to expand a little bit on as ultimately approved in the wording of your motion?
Yeah, for example, like Heather's comments, we're going to forward those to Executive Sadhu, to Councilman, I keep wanting to call you Barry, sorry, Councilman Buchanan. And what I've been seeing, because I've been sitting there with everyone for the last month, is this plan has been changing radically on almost a weekly basis as input comes in. So it's trying to balance incorporating all that in a holistic way, with the understanding too, we're up against some timelines if we really want to get moving. The plan itself in part reminds me of there's many choices that have to be made by the council and executive within the plan. The plan meaning it's defining here's a range of options. In an ideal world, we might have all of these, but we don't have the capacity to do them all. So I think from my perspective, the Law and Justice Council and Task Force needs to give some signal to the executive and the council that while this is not a final draft, it does reflect a direction that we're comfortable with. It's incorporating feedback as we get it and trying to get to the ultimate solution we're seeking to achieve, which is an improved justice system. So, you know, it's is it ideal? No. Have we come a long ways? Absolutely. And I'll note it takes a little bit of trust, which people often don't want to have in these situations, that when the council and executive have it, they'll make wise choices. I don't trust they'll do exactly what I want, but I have faith they're trying to get to the same place. So that's my support of the motion.
Thank you, Jack. Hold on, Executive Sudo. I'm going to go with the people who've been waiting with their hands up first, and then I'll get to you. And Arlene, I think your hand was up first.
Arlene,
You're muted, Arlene.
This is really hard for me because I have been working for the expansion of social services in Whatcom County for more than 10 years. And this is the moment, the opportunity, the time when it could happen. But in this plan, it has not happened. The feedback, the critical feedback that you have received from the public, from Bellingham City Council, incredible letter that they wrote, addresses the issue of balance. The balance of this bill is towards the jail and its construction and financing. Whatever you say does not change that. And it puts at risk the most important piece, which is intervening and prevention. Things that can make a difference from people going to the jail. The funding is clearly not significant and sufficient for the services that we want. $1 and $2 million a year, are you kidding? So I hate saying this, but I could not support this motion. And I wanted to, but you have not listened to the feedback and changed your balance sufficiently for us to support this. And you will see that the public will understand this and they will not vote for it.
Thank you, Arlene. Appreciate your views again. Jason, we're back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Clearly, this is a hot topic here, and I'm so grateful for being in this community at this time to help usher in some change. You know, this is not to be disrespectful to you, Tyler, or Executive Sadhu. My apologies for not acknowledging your title before in my comment, but just wanted to make sure I do see you as the executive, because you are. But this is a terrible plan, y'all. Like, this is the complete opposite of what the people are saying. Arlene and Heather just articulated that so much better than I can. And clearly I'm activated right now, but so the passion is coming out. This is a terrible plan. Like, you all have to at least see how terrible it is. You're building something with the hopes of 5 years or 10 years after it's built that we'll have funding for behavioral health services. That's not how that works. You all know that. That per the conversation we just had before about the Deacon Center, the system, the process, the procedures are not aligned with what the community is wanting at this time. Here's the question though. What data will we use to know if we are committing acts of unnecessary incarceration? That was mentioned, I believe, from Tyler. So that's one question I have. And another thing is, again, this plan is the complete opposite of what folks with lived experience are saying. I understand it's not a perfect plan, but this is it is our jobs, it is our obligation to go back as a committee or advisory committee to really put forth an actual plan that's more balanced than what this is. This is the complete opposite. I can't overstate that. And I'm going to keep stating that. This is not what BIPOC folks are saying in this community. This is not what folks with lived experience are saying in this community. And according to the data that was collected, very few young voices were brought forth in this data collection. Why didn't we do that? Nobody reached out to us here at Northwest Youth Services to get young people's voices here. The very same people that you all are trying to vote for a new jail for. So I'll pause there, but hopefully you all can answer that question. And again, yeah, to bring forth a motion at this time is really disrespectful to the people in this community, just FYI.
Thank you, Jason, for emphasizing that point. I'll just reiterate that your comments, Heather's comments, Arlene's comments, and other written comments that have been submitted, as well as the comments all along, because these were open meetings, open forums, open avenues for input, will be available to the council as well as it takes up whatever they do in coming stages. I'm going to go to Sheriff Elfo and then Executive Sidhu.
Mine is only a request. They asked Jack to reread the motion so I could understand it. I missed some of it there.
Sure.
Okay. Do you want that now or do you want that before we actually call the question?
That's fine. Before you call the question is fine.
Okay. Then I'll go to Executive Sidhu, and because we have several hands up.
Yeah. Can Marty or Holly, can you bring that graph back for visibility, please, if it is possible?
I'm sorry, the question was what?
The graph that Mr. Buchanan did a presentation, because it's very important for people to understand that how it is. You know, when we call it that there should be more allocation, when we talk about there should be more allocation to the behavioral and health center.
Thank you, Joe.
Behavioral services. I just want people to know that this is a unique situation this year where cities need all the credit that they are putting down $50 million, $50 million of their money for the benefit of this project and this issue in our community. If you look at from here, like people say, oh, we don't want to wait to day one. If you have a behavioral health project today, say January 1, 2024, it takes about 1 year to find what this project is, to define the project. When you say behavioral health services, it's a nebulous name. When you want to identify what are the 3 things you want to do, it will take you 12 months to define. Then we give it to somebody to design and where locate. That's 18 months to do that. And then you need the money to actually put it on the ground. We are forgetting that it should be done on January 1, 2024. If you look at that, as this money is available, I don't know, you can't see my cursor, but if you look at 2032, the green part is the capital cost of this project. That's why if first 4 years, 5 years, that's where bulk of the capital cost is being put down to bring the capital cost down. If you look at this graph, green, I'm saying again, green is the part which is the capital cost. Everything above green, which is 3 times the capital cost, 3 times the capital cost is for all other programs. I don't know like how more clear it can be. The committee, the IPRTF, the executive's office, council members talk to individually, Mr. Buchanan, all have been part of this, that how we can allocate more and more money towards behavioral health programs. And it is very visible. Green is the only capital cost in this graph. I fail to understand when people say there's not enough money. There's more than enough money. 3 times the money which is being spent on capital But this is possible only by doing it this way, because any behavioral health program you want to start in January 2024 will take 2 to 3 years to define the project, say, okay, now we have a backhoe and digging the ground. So what do we do for first 3 years? This is what we are trying to do. That in first 5 years, the jail will take 5 years to build. That's what we are trying to do. That's when we are not spending money. We're doing the engineering design, we're doing the groundwork, doing everything. We are paying the debt down. This $50 million, which is being given, is a golden goose, which will give it to the programs for next 25 years. Sorry, I'm raising my voice because we have worked so hard to convince people. The $50 million putting up front on capital is actually giving back for next 25 years, 3 times the money. Look at the interest rate. Look at the graph. It's starting with $13.5 million. It goes to a little less than $40 million collections, $40 million a year. You know the capital cost at that time is still $6 million. We collect $40 million. The collection, the spend on capital is only 6. I want people to pay more attention to how collaborative this process has been, how everybody has come together to put more and more money to the purpose what we want. Now, it is not perfect. I agree. I always say in many meetings, perfect is enemy of good. We can never find perfect solutions. And it takes systems, like all the system, like even the and Deacon Center. You know, it's been in operation for 3 years and it was COVID. And now we are finding ways to make it perfect.
Executive Sadhu, in deference to the people who also have their hands up, I respect your point. I thank you for emphasizing that. I don't think anybody who spoke with substantial concerns about the draft plan was questioning the sincerity or effort that went into drafting it. They were looking at the balance and raising questions about whether that balance fit the needs that they saw as primary, much the same way as you were articulating a view about whether the balance was a rational, practical approach to matters. So we're going to look at this differently, and that's why we're not debating this too extensively now. Raylene, I think your hand is up next, and then Chief Mertzig.
Thank you. And I think a lot of the stuff that I'm going to say has already been said, so I'm going to try to shorten that. I really respect what Executive Sadhu has just put forward, because I do agree with a lot of his comments. The concern is this is the Justice Project Implementation Plan as part of being supported by the Incarceration Prevention Reduction Task Force. Over the years, the task force has been looking for alternatives and will continue to look for alternatives. We have diversion programs that doesn't fit all things. It was brought up earlier about data. We don't have the perfect data. We're never going to be able to get everybody to agree on this topic. I think this is something that we will need to move forward for the safety of the people incarcerated, the safety of the people that are employed there. And it's not perfect. It's a plan. It's something that we need to work with. It's something that we need to look at diversion for. We've been working on this for years. I respect everybody's views. I just know we're not going to make everybody happy, and it's unfortunate, but we have to continue to move forward and not backwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Raylene. Chief Mertzig.
I'll be super brief. I hear the concerns, and I hope we can get to a place that has more broad collective consensus. But my biggest concern right now is a no vote right now means a yes vote for the status quo. And to me, that's not really acceptable. But I hope we can get there. I do have, there's a lot of great things in the work in Bellingham in terms of keeping people out of custody, work on a community court. Our LEAD program is showing to be super effective. And I just think that that's it's even more effective with without booking restrictions, when people are more encouraged to engage in those services when they know that they could choose an alternative to going. That's what we need. So that's all.
Thank you, Chief. Mayor Cortez.
And I'll try to keep my comments brief as well. I agree that a no vote today will be a vote for the status quo. There is another portion of this community that really wants a new jail, because what we have is deplorable and will not accept a whole bunch of behavioral health programs first, because the jail is in such poor condition. If you emphasize behavioral health over the jail, it'll probably be a no vote on that as well. And so this is the compromise, people. This is the compromise that gets a jail for the people who want a jail, but the behavioral health services for those who want behavioral health services. Now, the behavioral health services, as pointed out in the graph, will be out a few years, but they're coming. If you vote down today, but there is no money currently unless this program goes into effect to generate money for behavioral health services. So I very much encourage everyone to vote yes.
Thank you, Mayor Cortez. Deputy Executive Schroeder.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I just want to recognize the emotion of this conversation and fully understand it. A couple questions have been raised in consideration in regards to the process and individuals that were discussed with this plan and how it was developed. And I just want to compliment both the Stakeholder Advisory Committee and as well as the task force, but mostly I want to compliment the work of the consultants and the community for the input that we've gotten. If you go to page 10 of the plan, I always like to go to the document to understand how the plan is, what framework the plan is done. And sometimes that's helpful for me to not speak with emotion, but just kind of speak to what is the baseline and foundation of the plan. So back when the Stakeholder Advisory Committee was working, an online public survey of 1,700 different responses, a survey of 109 incarcerated individuals and 28 jail staff, 6 different listening sessions involving 29 different participants from immigrant, tribal, and previously incarcerated communities, 8 informal interviews with 5 immigrant community leaders and 3 Lummi Nation elders, and the town hall listening session with about 120 people in attendance and public comments. And that was for the first needs assessment work. And then we got down into truly identifying action and implementation. And a lot of you, if not all of you, have participated in that. And I understand it's getting late in that process, but a number of the implementation priority projects were done with different focus groups. And those focus groups input had individuals' lived experience, 26 different individuals in 2 different groups, 9 individuals from Lummi Nation, 8 individuals, BIPOC individuals that I met twice, Latinx and Hispanic, and other service providers. There's then kind of key informant interviews from Nooksack Tribal Police and deputies, and then 60 different focus group participants and 14 survey only participants. That's not to say all the other input that we got in the last town hall and where it goes. So I do think that this is a balance of what the community is looking for. And I understand there's some reaction to the chart. The chart is the best way to try to find a long-term funding source, but it's not the only funding source. This sales tax is not the only funding source. There's federal and state dollars that we all know we rely upon to build the crisis stabilization center that just got built to operate that facility. And my last thing, Stephen, because I know there's other, I want to point to page 8 of the plan. It recognizes all of the anticipated actions starting this year. Then that's a change that we wanted to do in this latest version. Because if you understand the different projects, there's about 15 of them. We want to move forward with project number 1. We want to move forward with project number 2. We want to move forward with project number 3. Project 4, that's moving forward this year as well. Project 5, that's moving forward this year as well. Project 6, that one's moving forward. 7, Design a Crisis Relief Center, which is $9 million from the state, that one's moving forward. I'll leave Project 8 off because that's the jail. And I understand it elicits a reaction and some emotion to it. But if you go to Project 9, Project 10, Project 11, Project 12, Project 13, Project 15, and Project 14, all of those have recommendations to move forward this year. So I think there is commitment to move forward with the expansion of those services and a compromise to build a new jail as well. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Tyler.
Before we
I'm
call,
gonna
Stephen,
I'm sorry.
Call on anyone else. I'm mindful of the time. It's 10:50.
Yeah.
We still have the annual report that we kind of need to address, and we have to have public comment. So I would suggest we close the queue after Councilman Hamel and Mayor Fleetwood. Even though I apologize for those people, I'm sympathetic, but we are really up against the clock here.
Thank you, Jack. That was my plan. I'm going to recognize Councilmember Hamel and then Mayor Fleetwood, and then I'm going to call the questions so that we can wrap up this item on the agenda. Councilmember Hamel.
Thank you, co-chairs. The City of Bellingham Mayor's Office and Council President Lillquist submitted a letter on behalf of the council to address these issues. And I want to make it clear that we emphasize the importance of behavioral health services across the spectrum. And then one other thing that's not getting into this discussion that I think that does need to be part of this is that there's a lack of housing for folks that are reentering the community. And we know that housing stabilization is one of the key factors for a person to not return to the criminal justice system. That was included as part of that letter. Also, I want one more point. Substance use disorder is not very effectively represented in this plan. And Co-Chair Hovenier, when you had made your motion about this implementation plan, when it comes to, you kind of made it sound like it's an evolving, living plan and document. If that's true, and I hope that it is, then I think that we need to make sure that we emphasize the inclusion of housing, a transitional housing for folks that are reentering the community, and make sure that we address substance use disorder, since 80% of the people that are currently incarcerated acknowledge that there's a substance use disorder, as well as the about 40% that have a mental health illness. So those items need to be addressed within any evolution of this plan. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Hamel. Mayor Fleetwood.
Thank you. In light of the time, I'll be very brief. First off, I just want to commend everyone for participation in this. It's been an amazing thing to watch as you all engage. And I just think it's been an organizational feat in so many ways. And it certainly, from my vantage point, seems as though it's been so inclusive. I just want to observe that the needs assessment is an enlightened document. And certainly speak on behalf of the city is committed to implementing it. I was on council over 20 years ago when the first effort at building a new facility came around. And this is just, I mean, if there's any good news about the fact that it didn't happen then, it's the fact that there's going to be a humane jail built now. But as it relates to the formula, that seems to be at least one of the major sources of concern. Speaking on behalf of the administration, our support for that formula was done with this very clear recognition this would help pay down the amount that's owed for the bond, and it would make available in several years significantly more money. $1 or $2 million was referenced, but over the course of the next 25, 30 years, what's going to be available, potentially in growing amounts, is the city's commitment. I anticipate very much that our council will support this. We're 80% of that 60%. We're $4 million now of it. And I can only imagine that a substantial portion of that is going to be committed to behavioral health, if not almost all of it. And so, point simply being that this is the means by which we get our hands on several more $1 million annually for many decades for behavioral health. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Fleetwood. Heather, I see your hand up with some personal disappointment, but acknowledgement of our process and the fact that you commented already and have a couple of written comments in the hopper. I'm not going to grant the floor to you at this point. As Jack suggested, we have a motion and a second, and I'm going to call that for a vote. I'm going to ask Jack to reread the motion, and then I'm going to ask Jill, because I remember in the past year, Jack pointing out that we've had very few decisions taken in the task force and the Law and Justice Council that haven't been unanimous or very near unanimous. This obviously will not be that for really, I think, the first time in our existence. So there are some complicated steps we need to take to ensure the accuracy and the actual recordation of the vote. Jill knows them. I'm not going to try to replicate them, but I'm going to ask Jack to read the motion again, and then Jill to walk us through the procedure. We'll need to take a vote on that motion. Jack?
Perfect. Thank you, Stephen. The motion is, I move that the Incarceration Prevention Reduction Task Force and Law and Justice Council endorse the Justice Project Implementation Plan as ultimately approved by the County Executive and County Council. And before Jill does that, just a reminder for those of you, like, for example, I know Executive Sadhu and not Assistant Deputy Executive Schroeder are just one vote. So they'll have to, probably it's Executive Sadhu voting, but for those of you in that situation, just please be mindful.
Thank you, everyone. As a reminder, according to the rules of procedure for the task force, the motion is approved if the number of votes in favor of the motion is more than 1/2 of the members present during the vote. By my count, we have 21 members present right now, so it will require 11 votes in favor for the motion to pass. I would ask that when I call out for votes, you press the raise hand icon and then give me a moment to count those raised hands. If you can't access your raised hand icon for some reason, feel free to just unmute and speak up. Thank you.
Is there a possibility of having a roll call vote?
I can do that, yes.
Jill, is there a reason not to have a roll call vote?
There is not a reason to not have it.
I know that'll take a bit longer, but I think that might be useful and safer. So I'll just ask you to call the roll, and I think you're looking for verbal ayes, nays, or abstains. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Arlene Feld.
Please unmute. Arlene, you need to unmute.
I'll move on. Barry Buchanan,
Yes.
Bill Elfo,
Yes.
Bruce Van Glupt,
Yes.
Dan Hamel,
Yes.
Darlene Peterson,
Yes.
Dave Reynolds,
Yes.
Donnell Tanksley,
Yes.
Eric Peterson,
Yes.
Eric Ritchie,
Yes.
Heather Flaherty,
No.
Jack Hovenier,
Yes.
Jason Miguel,
No, because this is still a status quo vote. Thank you.
Maya Vano,
No.
Perry Mowry,
Yes.
Raylene King,
Yes.
Rebecca Mertzick,
Yes.
Scott Fordyce,
Yes.
Stephen Gockley,
Yes.
Satpal Sidhu,
Yes.
Arlene Feld.
No.
Did I miss anyone?
City of Bellingham,
Seth Fleetwood, go ahead.
yes.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, so I have a vote in favor. The motion carries with 4 opposed.
Okay. Thank you. Really sincerely, thank you everyone for this discussion, for your participation to getting to this point, and some encouragement for all voices to stay in the game on this as this plan moves forward, gets digested, gets revised, gets expanded and clarified. There will be continued opportunities for input here.
Stephen, you want me to take annual report? We'll try.
Yes, please. That would be great.
And I want to just quickly say, Heather, Jason, Arlene, and Maya, you've all been great about input. Please keep giving it. Your input's super important. Thank you. All right. Annual report. Hopefully you've all seen it. Hopefully there are no significant concerns before I ask for a motion before I make a motion for that. Does anybody have a concern in the annual report that you've been seeing hopefully for a few months now? This will be the one we give to council later this month. See no hands raised. I move to approve the Incarceration Prevention Reduction Task Force 2023 annual report is presented and submit the report to the county executive and county council. Jill, I know we're not going to do a roll call on this. Can we do either hands up and ayes, and then I can call for nays and abstentions? Would that work?
That would work, yes.
Okay.
Jack, I think we need a second on that.
Oh yeah, you're right. I apologize. I absolutely do. Would someone be willing? I'll slow down.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Mayor Cordice. Is there any discussion? All in favor of approving the annual report, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, let's let all the hands come down now. Is there anyone opposed? Oh, my hand's up. And Bruce, I assume your hand's just up. Or is it opposed?
You know, I'm on my phone and I can't figure out.
Okay,
There I
it's
go.
off.
I figured
Okay,
it.
no
Sorry
worries.
about that.
Okay. Are there any abstentions? So Jill, for the purposes of the record, since that was passed, the motion passed unanimously with, it even says scam likely. The motion passed unanimously with no abstentions and no no's. Does
Thank
that work? Does that work for the record?
Yes, that does. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Okay. We are out of time, but we need to take the time for public comment. Stephen, I think that's the appropriate next thing to do, correct? Okay, I will turn that over to you and Jill. And again, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Yes, we do have a number of attendees today virtually. If you would like to speak to the task force, please virtually raise your hand now. We do have a couple of hands raised already. I'm gonna, Kaylani, go ahead and speak.
Aloha, everyone. Can you guys see me?
No, we cannot see you, but we can hear you, Kaylani.
Okay, just wanted to get that on the record. So this is to the public because I will be sharing it with other people. Is one of the things that I've listened to this meeting is money. Everything is money, 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 money. We are not focusing on what really is the ultimate. Is we have in 2021 there was 228,000 people that reside in Whatcom County. When I don't want to name names, but the individual actually started talking about this needs assessment with breaking down numbers. Those numbers do not calculate to 228,000 people. We need 21 people that are on this call cannot be making a decision for 228,000 people. And I really would like that to be in consideration for the future, because the public needs to be aware that jails are only making communities more unsafe. I am a wife of an incarcerated individual, and I can tell you that the structure is a problem. The staff who treat individuals is a problem. And if we create another jail, it's really going to create more harm than good, to be honest. And I really hope that we would take that in consideration. Several of us in the public have formed together. We will be having a town hall meeting. We also will be inviting all of you to that. So far, we're looking at over 500 participants. So it is something that I feel is very, very, very important that the public get involved for such a huge decision. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Kaylani. And I assure you that your comment and the other comments from today's meeting will go with the online comments that the council will have access to. Thanks for taking part.
Liz Darrow, go ahead and speak.
Hi, thank you. Good morning. My name is Liz Darrow. I use she, her pronouns. First of all, I want to thank Heather, Jason, Maya, and Arlene for your no votes. And I also just want to highlight that having public comment come after your vote is really disingenuous. And I think it's a symptom of the larger problem here, which all four of those members spoke to so well. I also just want to mention, I appreciate Tyler Schroeder for detailing all of the ways in which public input was gathered. I was a member of the focus group for service providers, and I can assure you that none of the input that we gave in that focus group was included in this report today. So I think it's one thing to gather the input, it's quite another thing to integrate the input. And finally, I just want to say that when we're talking about funding for behavioral health coming 25 to 30 years down the road, that's way too late. I think that we're getting a carrot and stick approach here. We're being forced as a community to take something that many of us said that we don't want. And we've said it in many spaces, professional and otherwise. I also was a signatory, as was the organization that I work with, Community to Community Development, on a letter with more than 28 other signatures that came to the task force and was not addressed in this report. Thank you.
Marcus D. Smith, go ahead and speak.
Hi, Marcus D., Serenity Outreach Services. Thank you all for your time and efforts that you put in. I don't mean to sound too harsh when I say that those efforts have largely failed on the needs assessment from my perspective. And as you see from others, I do tend to agree with that. I'd also like to acknowledge that you can't see me, right? So I do invite anybody to answer questions, though, that I might pop up with. I see an accessibility issue with meetings like this, accessibility for those of us who really want to give input. And those of us who have the means, Wi-Fi and cell phones, and the ability to join these meetings, and the ability to join your questionnaires, to be reached out to on social media and stuff. I want to acknowledge the 1,000+ people who were counted in the PIT count, let alone the other people who are really here, who don't have, I mean, what attempt was made to reach out to them? You're free to answer that one. Did the HOT team reach out to those people to try to get their opinions? Did anybody from any homeless outreach services do that? You have partners, that you guys are referencing today, and yet you have so many community potential partners, some of which have been much maligned by people attending this meeting, by politicians. And they don't get a voice. They never had a voice. I think that's totally inappropriate, guys. The sales tax is a hell of a way to sock it to the poor, isn't it? So that's just the framework of that is ugly. So again, your needs assessment, that tax, you got people out here with established relationships with our neighbors out there who could have helped to get their opinions, because they are the affected community. And certainly, as we've heard often from Bill Elfo, they're not equipped to handle that. And that's why we're in this crisis for these services that are needed. But services absolutely need to be emphasized to eliminate the need for incarceration. And I'm really not seeing that focus from this group. I am not seeing the representation of the people who are largely the incarcerated and the homeless specifically. Again, I urge you to go all the way back to the drawing board. I know it sucks. You want to talk about the status quo? Man, we're looking at it still. So I'm with Jason on that. And I thank you for your time. I've got so much more to say, but I can only speak for myself when I try to speak for 1,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus G.
Andy Douglas, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to thank you for the work you're doing on this project. Unfortunately, however,
incarceration has not been reduced or prevented so far. And this task force has been working on this for years and years. I didn't like that chart that I saw because it mixed the funding between the behavioral health facility and the jail. I don't think people are going to trust something that doesn't tell them where the money's going. And I think from the people I have talked to, which is mostly PCOs and political groups, they are not in favor of blindly submitting to having a very large jail without any guarantee of a great behavioral service facility, and that needs to come first because that's where you have the prevention, and then the follow-up services where you get the reduction and re-incarceration. I don't see a focus on that here. I do know we need a new jail. I have no problems with Ferndale, especially since mental health workers don't get paid enough to live in Bellingham, unfortunately. So thank you for your work, but this just is not adequate, and I'm sure this is not going to be popular with the population in Bellingham. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
If anyone else would like to speak to the task force, please virtually raise your hand now. And no more hands are raised, and I don't see anyone in attendance in our conference room. Thank you, everyone.
Stephen, I've got just a quick comment. I want to, a couple people, we don't really respond necessarily to public comment. So let me say, first of all, you're welcome to email your comments to the task force. I also wanted to reiterate Whatcom County's policy. Several people have mentioned something about not being able to see them. So if you would like to be seen, Whatcom County has a policy for all the advisory groups, not just this one, not to have video on Zoom calls for public comment. If you would like to be visible in a video, the conference room is available. We can see you on video there. And that is a uniform policy, not just for this task force established by the county. And if you'd like to know more about it, we can email you the policy, you can email us. But I just wanted to be clear why that is. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Jack. There's no further business on the agenda, and I want to thank everybody for their really active and thoughtful participation in this conversation and forthcoming conversations. As of now, this meeting will stand adjourned.
Jack and Stephen, if you can stay behind, that would be great.
Sure.